Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Imagine a cave, 50,000 years ago. The firelight flickers, casting long shadows. It illuminates not just the robust figures of our Neanderthal cousins, but something else. A small cache of curious objects gathered from miles away. They have no practical use. They won't help you hunt, build a shelter, or stay warm. They are fossils, beautiful marine shells, and strangely shaped rocks, carried home simply because they were interesting. This simple act of collecting, this flicker of curiosity, is forcing us to completely rethink who the Neanderthals were. Today, we're delving into the minds of our ancient relatives to uncover the dawn of collection and symbolism. For much of the 20th century, we painted Neanderthals with a very broad and, frankly, very unflattering brush. They were the archetype of the brutish, dim-witted caveman, a dead-end branch on the evolutionary tree, intellectually and culturally overshadowed by the arrival of us, Homo sapiens. Their stone tools, while effective, were seen as static and purely utilitarian. Their lives imagined as a grim and constant struggle for survival, with no room for the abstract thought that so defines our own species. But over the past few decades, a torrent of discoveries has begun to dismantle this simplistic and unfair caricature. This revolution in our understanding is largely thanks to a fascinating field called cognitive archaeology. Cognitive archaeology is the discipline that seeks to understand the minds of ancient peoples, but it faces an immense challenge. Cognition itself, the mental processes of thinking, knowing, remembering, and problem-solving, is intangible. It does not fossilize. So archaeologists must become detectives of the mind, inferring these lost cognitive abilities from the hard evidence of the archaeological record. They analyze the tools, looking for signs of planning and complex manufacturing steps. They study settlement patterns to understand social organization. They examine the treatment of the dead for clues about ritual and belief. And most intriguingly, they scrutinize the enigmatic, non-utilitarian objects that occasionally surface in the excavated earth of ancient caves and rock shelters. It is through the careful analysis of this material evidence that we can begin to piece together the puzzle of the Neanderthal mind. The debate about Neanderthal intelligence is complex and far from settled. Some recent studies, for instance, suggest that subtle differences in brain development and structure might have given Homo sapiens a cognitive edge, particularly in areas related to social networking and the processing of complex information. But other researchers fire back, arguing that there is no definitive evidence for the cognitive inferiority of Neanderthals. In fact, their brains were, on average, slightly larger than our own, although organized a bit differently. And when you compare Neanderthals to their contemporaries, rather than to their later successors, they appear to have been just as capable in many respects. The archaeological record now attests to a range of complex behaviors that fly in the face of the old stereotypes. They were apex predators, skilled hunters of massive game like mammoths and woolly rhinos. They were proficient toolmakers, employing sophisticated multi-step techniques like the Levallois method, which requires significant forethought and the ability to visualize a finished tool within a block of stone. And they were masters of fire, using it for warmth, cooking, and protection. The brutish caveman is a myth. The reality is far more interesting. The most compelling evidence for advanced cognition in Neanderthals comes from the discovery of objects and behaviors that appear to be symbolic in nature. Symbolically mediated behavior, the ability to assign arbitrary meaning to objects, sounds, or actions, is the cornerstone of modern human culture. It underpins everything from language and art to religion and social identity. For a long time, this capacity was considered the exclusive domain of Homo sapiens. Yet, a growing body of evidence now suggests that Neanderthals too were capable of symbolic thought. Across Europe, Neanderthal sites are yielding tantalizing clues. At sites like the Grotte du Renne in Archaeology, France, Neanderthal remains from the Château-Perronian period have been found in association with personal ornaments like ivory rings and animal teeth pendants, as well as decorated bone tools and pigments. The interpretation of this site has been a subject of intense debate for years. Some have argued that the layers were mixed, and these symbolic artifacts were actually made by later modern humans. However, repeated and detailed analyses have provided strong, though not universally accepted, support for the Neanderthal origin of these symbolic artifacts, suggesting they were capable of creating their own distinct culture of adornment. Other sites have revealed a sophisticated use of the natural world for decoration. In Italy, at Fiumane Cave, evidence shows that Neanderthals were systematically targeting and cutting the wing bones of large raptors, like eagles and lammergeiers, around 45,000 years ago. The goal wasn't meat, but to extract the long, impressive flight feathers, which were likely used for personal decoration. Imagine a Neanderthal with a striking eagle feather tucked into their hair. At Zaskelnaya in Crimea, a raven bone was found bearing a series of 7 notches that are clearly not consistent with butchery marks. They are evenly spaced and deliberately engraved. Furthermore, we have widespread evidence for the use of pigments. At the site of Pic de la Zaye in France, over 500 fragments of black manganese oxides have been recovered, many showing signs of being scraped or ground into a powder. This, combined with the ubiquitous use of red ochre, points towards a culture of color. These pigments could have been used for many things, like decorating objects or hides, but one of the most likely uses is body painting, a powerful and universal form of personal adornment and social signaling. Another behavior that points towards a more complex Neanderthal inner world is the deliberate burial of the dead. While elaborate grave goods are rare in Neanderthal burials, the intentional interment of individuals at sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and La Chapelle aux Saints in France suggests a level of social ritual and consideration for their departed kin. The famous flower burial at Shanidar, where clumps of pollen from various flowers were found in a grave, has been hotly debated. It's possible the pollen was brought in by burrowing rodents, but even if we discount the flowers, the very act of digging a grave and placing a body within it speaks volumes. It separates the dead from the world of the living and the world of ordinary refuse, and the remains from Shanidar Cave also tell an incredible story of compassion. The skeleton known as Shanidar I belonged to an older man who had survived a crushing blow to the head that likely blinded him in one eye, a withered arm that had been amputated at the elbow, and severe arthritis. He would have been severely disabled. Yet he lived for many years with these injuries. This is only possible if his group cared for him, fed him, and protected him. This isn't the behavior of brutish beasts. It's the behavior of a community bound by empathy and social responsibility. But perhaps the most intriguing and telling of all these symbolic behaviors is the collection of unusual natural objects, particularly fossils and minerals. Archaeologists call these items manuports, natural, unmodified objects that have been picked up and transported by people. The act of collecting items that have no immediate practical function is a profound cognitive leap. It suggests a capacity for aesthetic appreciation, for pure curiosity, and for the recognition of the unusual. It means seeing an object not for what it does, but for what it is. This brings us to a remarkable recent discovery at the Prado Vargas cave in northern Spain. Excavations in a Mousterian level of the cave, securely dated to a time between 39,854, 600 years ago, unearthed a Neanderthal's treasure box. It was a collection of 15 marine fossils. These weren't fossils that had naturally eroded into the cave. They belonged to species like Tylostoma, a type of sea snail, Granicardium productum, a bivalve, and Phalodomia gigantea, another large clam. They were deliberately brought to the cave by Neanderthals. Analysis of the geology showed that the nearest source for some of these fossils was over 30 kilometers away. That's a significant journey, a deliberate pilgrimage to acquire these specific, strange objects. And here is the crucial point that makes this discovery so significant. With the exception of one fossil that may have been opportunistically used as a hammerstone, the rest show no signs of being used as tools or modified for ornamentation. They were not being worked into something else, they were just collected. The researchers who made the find suggest that these fossils can be understood as evidence of an artistic interest or a curiosity for the forms of nature. This collection is unprecedented in its size. While other Neanderthal sites have turned up one or two such curated objects, finding 15 in a single living space suggests a more systematic and repeated behavior. It hints at a genuine hobby, and critically, these fossils date to a time long before the arrival of Homo sapiens in this region. This was not a behavior learned from their new neighbors. This was an independent Neanderthal innovation, a product of their own cognitive evolution. The Proto-Vargas find, while spectacular, doesn't stand alone. It is the most dramatic example of a pattern of curiosity seen across the Neanderthal world. In Hungary, at the site of Tata, archaeologists discovered an object dating back about 100,000 years. A small, oval plaque meticulously crafted from a mammoth tooth enamel plate. Microscopic analysis revealed its edges were carefully beveled and polished, and remnants of red ochre in its cracks showed it was once painted. This is a powerful piece of evidence for Neanderthal artistic inclination. Also at Tata, they found a small, smooth nummulite fossil, a disc-shaped marine protozoan that had been incised with a crosshatch mark. The design is intentional and purely symbolic. At another site, a scallop shell was found that had a naturally occurring red stripe. Fascinatingly, it appears that when the color on one side of the shell faded, a Neanderthal carefully replaced it by painting a line with an orange pigment, perfectly continuing the natural pattern. This act of recognizing, valuing, and then reproducing a pattern demonstrates a high degree of cognitive ability and symbolic thinking. We see this abstract thought on a larger scale too. In Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, there's a famous engraving on the floor, a crosshatch pattern often called the hashtag. It would have required hundreds of deep, precise, and repeated cuts into the rock to create. It has been firmly attributed to Neanderthals and is seen as unambiguous evidence of their capacity for symbolic expression. Even their choice of raw materials for tools sometimes seems guided by more than just practicality. Numerous hand axes have been found where the flint knapper has intentionally centered a fossil within the stone, making it a focal point of the tool. They saw the fossil, recognized its uniqueness, and chose to showcase it. So who was doing all this collecting? One of the most captivating hypotheses is that it was the work of Neanderthal children. Studies of modern human children show that collecting behaviors often emerge between the ages of 3 and 6, driven by a pure sense of wonder, curiosity, and exploration. Children are natural collectors of shells, interesting rocks, and other small treasures. And tellingly, the remains of Neanderthal children have been found at Proto-Vargas Cave, making their involvement in the fossil collection a plausible and poignant scenario. If this is the case, it paints a picture of Neanderthal childhood that is strikingly familiar. It suggests that Neanderthal children, like our own, were curious about the world around them, that they found joy and wonder in the discovery of unusual objects, and that they brought these treasures back to share. This not only humanizes Neanderthals, but also suggests that the cognitive foundations for collecting and curation may have incredibly deep evolutionary roots. As with any aspect of cognitive archaeology, it is important to consider alternative interpretations. Some researchers remain skeptical, arguing that the evidence is too sparse or ambiguous. They point out that the density of symbolic artifacts at Neanderthal sites is, on the whole, much lower than at contemporary Homo sapiens sites in Africa, or the later explosion of art in Upper Paleolithic Europe. This has led to the, quote, bow wave diffusion, or acculturation model, which suggests that some of the symbolic behaviors seen in late Neanderthal populations could have been the result of contact with incoming modern humans. Essentially, the idea is that they saw what we were doing and started copying it. However, the growing number of discoveries of symbolic behavior at sites that clearly predate the arrival of modern humans, such as the 100,000-year-old Tata plaque and the collection at Prado Vargas, makes the argument for independent innovation increasingly compelling. It seems more likely that the development of symbolic behavior was not a sudden revolution, but a more gradual and mosaic process, with different elements appearing, disappearing, and reappearing in different hominin populations at different times. Perhaps Neanderthals expressed their symbolism differently, in ways that are less archaeologically visible, such as through stories, music, or dance, which leave no trace. So let's circle back to that image. A Neanderthal, perhaps a curious child, perhaps a thoughtful adult, carefully picking up a fossil from a rocky outcrop and carrying it for miles, back to the warmth and safety of the cave. It is a powerful image. It is an image that challenges our long-held prejudices and forces us to reconsider the nature of our extinct relatives. The evidence for Neanderthal fossil collecting, alongside the growing body of data for other symbolic behaviors, paints a picture of a hominin that was far from a dim-witted brute. They were a successful and adaptable species that thrived in the challenging environments of Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They possessed a complex technology, a sophisticated understanding of their environment, and, it would seem, a capacity for abstract thought, empathy, and beauty that we are only now beginning to appreciate. The study of cognitive archaeology reveals that the lines between us and them are not as clearly defined as we once thought. The desire to collect, to find beauty in the unusual, to imbue objects with meaning, these are behaviors that we often consider to be uniquely human. Yet, the evidence suggests that these behaviors may have their roots in the minds of our ancient cousins. The story of human evolution is not a simple linear progression from primitive to advanced. It is a rich and complex tapestry, woven with the threads of many different hominin lineages, each with its own unique cognitive world. And as we continue to unearth the secrets of our past, we may find that the Neanderthals have much more to teach us about what it truly means to be human.